is this real?
True.
And the elephant painted an elephant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and also flowers.
But then you work on it. You go, so we're in exactly the same situation you're in that Vincent suggested on the fiscal measures. And, we write papers, we talk to people, I talk to the finance minister, all that. I'll tell you a story about corn ethanol, ethanol from corn. The finance minister brought in about 6 environmental economists, including some from Europe, very big names, and had a private meeting with him, and he said, should we subsidize corn ethanol? Ethanol made fuel, alcohol made from corn. Every person in the room said, no, bad idea. Terrible idea. And we all predicted the impacts that it did have. Drove up food prices, people couldn't get the feed for their animals or the corn for their food products. Way too much for it. What did he do in the next budget? You can guess by what I'm going to say. He subsidized corn ethanol. Why? Because after we came in, the farm lobby came in. And we're 6, policy academic people. And then the farm lobby has how many votes? Many, right? Even though they're all concentrated, in one part of the country more. I mean, our farm area is in the middle of the country. 3 days is add to that list. We're not going to get rid of it. We're just going to add to it to make it more applicable. So, as I said, for the 3 days, today we're going to do problems. Tomorrow we're going to do criteria and measures. And then the 3rd day, we're going to, I might get more of these. I might spill over a bit from your outline. We'll get into the making recommendations and adoption part. So those are the key things. I'm not going to tell you how to do research. You all know how to do research. You've all got your own frameworks in the areas you work in. And as I've said, it's going to be step, step, step. But remember, you're always thinking. You're thinking in a circle, not in the steps. So that's the introductory material to give you the kind of big picture of where we're going. And we've got then steps in problem identification. So according to the schedule, we have a coffee break at 10:30. Would you rather have it now and start this fresh? I am, okay. Yeah, okay, why don't we, I don't want to go like 3 slides in and then say stop. So I've done the introductory material, and why don't we take a break and then we can do more on the problem stuff. Vincent's got us at the farmer's market for the whole morning. Be back at about 10:30, 10:40. We have.
So we spend 1 hour.
Oh, 10:30. Yeah, you've got a 15-minute break. 10:30. Okay. Thank you very much. Given the internet and things like that, so if you're totally welcome to use these slides if they're of any use to you in any of your teaching or research. So that's one reason we gave you copies of them. I'm happy to have you use them if you find it interesting. So let's start then at the beginning. Problem identification and framing, or problem definition is another way we call it. I think this is the hardest part. Like once you've got this nailed, once you've got this defined, the rest, you know what you're doing. You're all accomplished researchers. You know how to think about your problem. You know how to do the research. It's the issue of what is it that I'm going to do. So what issue am I going to address? And I'm going to take you through a process that looks a little like make work. It's saying, I want you to define everything. And the reason I do that is because it's the best check on whether you know what you're doing and the boundaries of your problem, how far they go. And as I said before the break, we can't solve poverty in one policy analysis. We can deal with education. We can deal with geographical barriers. We can deal with skills mismatches. People are trained for the wrong things. We can deal with, take the big problem. We typically then take a narrower part of it. Or we're looking at environmental degradation. We're looking at the, loss of ecosystem biodiversity. Well, we're not going to solve biodiversity problems, one of us, but we may look at it in a particular region. I've been working with, through EATC, with a researcher looking at protecting natural areas, protected areas, and the species within it. Well, the lessons learned from that study can apply to broader studies. So, you do have to have a specific focus. I've said that although we're doing this step, think about, as I'm going through this, I do want to think about my options as I'm going along. And you're going to constantly be redefining. It's often the case that the problem you think you have, you get halfway through the research and you go, no, it's over here. It's not quite the same problem I thought it was, because I now understand it better, and that's okay. You don't want to be too narrow. You want to be able to think about, have I really got the right problem? And as I've said, it's really important to engage the policy community, multidisciplinary stuff, but also the people outside of academics or research units that will think about it. And they should be, what do you think is the problem? How do you see it from your point of view? Because if you don't do that, you may go way down the track toward implementing a policy and then find, no, there's a whole bunch of opposition to it. So, let's look at steps in problem, I call it problem identification. How do you even start? Well, I like to talk to people, you might have gathered that. Talk to your colleagues. Talk to people who are interested in the area. So we call this brainstorming. Think about it. How would I think about the problem? Because you'll get some of that perspective. Then you also want to do something more rigorous. You want to delineate the boundaries of the problem. By this I mean, has this been a problem we've had for 10 years, 50 years, last week? So you want to look at the framework of the problem in time. Is this something that's a recent problem, a long-standing problem? You want to look at its breadth, the scope. Is this a problem that's national, to local, to international? Is it regional? Does it apply to different ecozones? Or does it apply to different types of natural resource environments? Is it a watershed problem? All watersheds have this problem, some watersheds. What are the levels of government? National? Down to local? International? Do I need cooperation? Because this will all help you decide. So, and then the one thing that, economists are pretty bad about this, they think that everything happened just to them. What are the historical priors to the problem? Has this problem been around for a long time? And have other people looked at it? And what did they think? So I like to, in this stage, this is not something that ultimately, a little of it will come into your final report, and on Tuesday we'll talk about what kind of reports come out of policy analysis. But you're going to want to have some of this in your final report. But it's more for you as a building block for your analysis. And I'm a big fan of tables and charts, because to me, I can have words and words, and I have, now on my computer, that's not mine, but mine, I have just stacks of papers. I used to have them stacked up in my office. Now I just have thousands of bits of stuff. So I need a frame. I need to draw something on a piece of paper that tells me all this stuff. So I do either mapping or tables to just give me that feel for what my problem is. Okay, so this is all part of the framing. This is all part of understanding your problem. Then you want to start on the data part of it. And this isn't the data that is the analysis of your problem. This is the data pertaining to your problem. So what you also want is the fact base. Who are the institutions that might be connected to this, both government and non-government, social, environmental, political, community, etc. What are we currently doing? Very few problems in public policy are totally new, where nobody has ever done anything about it before. So you want to have what the current policy is. So coming back, and I keep using the fiscal one because it's my favorite example because it's what we're dealing with. By the way, you know how we're going to approach that, Ming-san, because we can't get the government involved? So we're going to create what we call, this is something you might want to think about, a green fiscal commission. And we're going to get experts. We have exactly the same problem Ming-san was talking about this morning, of not getting people to pay attention to the new law or trying to get a new law in. So we're going to create a green fiscal commission. And again, the word fiscal instead of environmental or anything else, so, you know, they go, oh, fiscal's good.
Subsidies.
Subsidies. That's what I'm talking about in Ottawa, eliminating all these subsidies. It's not going to be pretty. So the Green Fiscal Commission will consist of the former Deputy Minister of Finance, who's now retired. It consists of very influential economists who are not all environmental economists. We have one economist in my country who's a big tax guy. You know, he's known, he's very, very well known. He runs another policy school. So he'll be on it. We have the Assistant Deputy Minister of Finance who was the chief economist for one of the big banks. So the Green Fiscal Commission will look at implementing the kind of things Ming-san is talking about. And so here, see, I've already paid my plane ticket, right?
Actually, I should, it's IFSI that...
IFSI paid my plane ticket. So I'm not taking money out of the research in Thailand. No.
Not at all.
But just somebody else's research. But, so, you know, if you can't get through it one way, think about it another way. So that's where, you know, stakeholders and thinking about the range of feasible policies. You know, if I can't get people to listen one way, let me think about it another way. Okay, and all this is at the beginning. You know, this is not, you know, the more you do at the beginning, the more it frames the research that you're going to be doing. So as I've said, structure your thoughts. You know, it's really important at this stage to even start writing, to start putting this stuff down, because it'll help you think through the problem. Assemble what you know, catalog your data, get precise and complete statements, and then define your terms. And I'm going to explain all this with some examples in just a minute. And as I keep saying, talk to people. Okay, so let's go through these steps in a little more detail. What are the boundaries? And this is where, you know, you're going to start having data. Where is the problem? What level of government? So, I mean, you want to sort of have a little checklist for yourself, or even a table that has all of these things on it. So you've got that information. Now when it comes to writing up, whether it's a policy brief or a policy backgrounder or a briefing memo, you've got all of those things ready, right there at your fingertips. You don't have to go back and look for them in your computer filing cabinet. How long it's existed? How did we get here? You know, why has this problem emerged? What are the events? And is this part of a bigger issue that's going on? Is it part of a bigger study? I mean, if I'm looking at the health of children, is this part of a bigger agenda to improve the well-being of Thai society? You know, so you want to embed your problem in a bigger set of social objectives. Right? Here are the people that might be part of the stakeholder group. Obviously, the political part. The civil servants, the bureaucrats. In Thailand, how powerful are the people that work for the ministry, not the politicians?
Getting less and less power.
Yeah, my country too. And we have a parliamentary system in Canada, which meant that the civil service, the bureaucrats that work in the public sector are professionals, and they serve whoever is the leaders, right? So they are, in a sense, not political appointments. They are professional appointments. But and that has been, it's the UK, the Westminster tradition. That has been the tradition in my country for 150 years. But the current government is moving to, you know, not let them speak as professionals, So their power has gone down. They used to be very much more powerful. So, you know, you have to look at who is powerful. People who are we call these thought leaders, or ideas, or that, you know, who are the thought leaders? A thought leader is somebody who's influential in the area. Might be an academic, might be another spokesperson. Who are those people? The media, you love and hate them, at least in my country. The media is a very important stakeholder, both for helping and for hurting, because the media can get attention to be paid to your problem. It can also distort and inflame the public by not having the information presented in the way you would like. So if you're going to do policy analysis, you need to pay a lot of attention to the media. And my recommendation here is wherever you are living and whoever is influential, you should have friends in the media. You should have people that you can talk to, that you say, you know, here's some information. You know, here's something you should know, and spend time with them. I have a favorite reporter who does one of my other areas of research is transportation policy, and that's her. She's a city, but she has a blog that goes nationwide. I'll spend, you know, half an hour on the phone with her, talking about things, because then she gets it from me, rather than from somebody who's going to paint it in a way that makes it more political, or frames it in a way to get what they want. So I think it's very important in policy analysis to cultivate. You'll never get them to do what you want them to do all the time, but you can get better media coverage of the issues you're dealing with by spending time with them. And then there are the other non-governmental groups, interest groups, and non-governmental organizations, which will differ by the type of policy problem. So these are your stakeholders. You know, and then there's affected parties. There's the people that would be the recipients of a policy change, maybe, organized in some sort of interest group, or may just be the community, depending on the level. So, like Kunyalani's work that was with individual fishers, that's her interest group, right? You're going to that community to talk to those people. She was experimenting on them too. It's a different story. Okay. What's the fact base? The fact base is, what do I know about this problem? The basic information. I get the data and my facts. I'm going to learn more about it as I go along. Again, who are the institutions involved? Who are the stakeholders? Talked about this. The point of this step is to say, what do we know going into the problem? It's equally important to say, what don't we know? Where are the gaps? Where's the missing information that I don't have, that I need to get? Because I don't understand this, I don't have the full picture. And as importantly as well, where am I going to get my information? And this will feed into your methodology, but where's that information going to come from? Okay, so the more you lay out at the beginning, the easier your job is going to be, sort of going through. You can almost do some of this stuff as a checklist, going through the pragmatic approach. Okay, so third part of, we still have to get to the problem, but these are all the component parts of the problem. So identify the range of current policy, the current policy framework, and the feasible options. This is what exists now. Okay? So you'll probably be looking at the legislation, but not just writing down law. I mean, we know that laws are there, but it's really, how do they apply? What do they mean? Do they get implemented? Do they get enforced? Do they carry any weight? So the powers available, the institutions, what are the property rights in the region? Who gets to decide about stuff? Do landowners have a say in things? And then down to the social and the cultural. What are the customs and laws? In one of the papers I read, I can't remember which one that's going to be presented, so we'll find it again. You know, talking about whether you can do a particular policy if it'll be adopted by the local community, who may have customs that say, we can't do that. It's not fair. It's not part of our culture. So that's all stuff that you should be working on at the very beginning. And as I keep saying, talk to stakeholders. And I talked about this at the general introduction. Try to, if you're going to work on a problem and you want to influence decision making, it's always good to say, it's time. I need to get this out. So part of the, is this a long-term research? Can I do this for the next 5 years? Or do I have to get something out next week? Because they're talking about it right now. So again, the reason I'm going to Ottawa is we're talking about regulations of building pipeline infrastructure. The government's going to make a decision in about 2 months, or less than that. If I don't get my ideas in there, they're probably not going to listen to me because they don't like me. But at least I'll, be able to say, have you thought about it? And I'll probably get media coverage because I'm going to say things that the minister won't like. So the policy window is open. It may not change the outcome, but at least you've got it at a time where you can say, I tried. Okay? So it's just a good time. If you're thinking of looking at problems and you want to have an influence, then look for areas where you can say, aha, people are thinking about this. They're worried about this. We're really worried in my country about the economy, which is why I said I'm going to frame much more of my stuff on jobs rather than environment right now. I mean, environment connected to jobs, because they're not thinking that way. So I'm focusing my work, my looking at things in the context of what they're interested in right now. And you're going to think about the policy instruments as well. Come to that. Okay, enough of principles. So this is why I said problem definition might be the hardest part, because you're going to spend a lot of time on this. You're going to refine it. You're not going to do this all today. But the more that you can do at the beginning, as I keep saying, the shorter, the easier your job is going to be. So I'm going to give you some examples. And then I want to show you how we, where did this example come from? How do we work within these examples to do this in a structured way? So suppose I'm looking at access to clean drinking water for household consumption. And I've come up with and I've been thinking about this problem. I'm looking at it in parts of the world, your part of the world or part of the region where people don't have access to clean drinking water. And I want to come up with a problem statement. Okay? This sounds like, why does Nancy make us do this? She makes us do this so we know what we're talking about. And then I'll show you how the other steps fit in. So I'm going to start with a proposed policy problem statement. This is a policy problem statement. And I'm going to say that poor households pay too high a share of their total income for access to drinking water. What I'm going to try to get you to do as practice, and we'll do more of this afternoon when we have the discussion part, is to come up with no more than 2 sentences, ideally 1. You should be able to define your problem in 1 sentence. If you can't, you haven't thought about it enough. You should be able to articulate a problem in 1 sentence. You'll then go into the background and all that other stuff and broaden the understanding of it. You should have 1 sentence, ideally 1 sentence, maybe 2. So what am I thinking? Well, I'm thinking about this. I could be thinking lots of things, but as an economist, I'm thinking, well, here's something I've observed. This is either, lots of empirical data or anecdotal information that household incomes, the lower the household income, the greater the percentage of total income spent on water. In other words, it's regressive. I spend a higher proportion of my income if I'm a low-income household on getting access daily to clean drinking water than if I'm a high-income household. Okay? So that's an empirical observation. It could be a hypothesis that doesn't have empirical support behind it. It's just something that, in my analysis, I think I've happened. But, so this is something we can test. This is real information. But as a policy issue to look at, It involves a value judgment. I mean, if I think, so you should say, why is this a problem? Well, the value judgment is, it's not right. It's unfair. It's not healthy. I'm going to have other goals behind this to say why that, those less able to pay for an essential good probably need some help. So I can have an empirical observation, but behind that, to translate it into a policy problem, I've got to say, I don't like this current situation because I think it's inappropriate that poor people have to pay, low-income households have to pay more proportionately to their total income for clean drinking water. Okay, so there will be value judgments behind what you do. Otherwise, it's not a policy problem. Now I want you to dissect that sentence. This is where, you're framing the problem. So every word other than the ands and the thes and the us are going to have to be defined in that statement. So let's go back to the statement. Okay. I want to define poor, households, pay. There are a lot of words. See, you don't want a really long sentence because you'll have to do too much. What's too high mean? What share of total income mean? And what does access mean? And what does drinking water mean? Okay, the only words I don't have to define are for, to, of. So this is why you want a short sentence. But why are we doing this? We're doing this so we understand where we're going. It's part of this whole framing of the problem. What's a household? Well, in my country, a household has a statistical definition in terms of our data gathering. If the statistical definition is up there, it's all individuals who apply a given dwelling unit, basically, is what that says. Okay. Is that a good definition? The advantages of it is that allows you to look at statistical data. I can look at secondary data. We used to have a census. We still do, but it's not a very good one anymore. It won't be. But I can go to census data. I can define, or I can go to, individual community level records and say, how many households do I have? Where are they located? Okay. So that's pretty helpful. Is there any problem with that definition? Would that work in Thailand?
It's the same definition.
Pretty much the same?
Yeah, it's the same definition.
Okay. Who lives in the household? So it says, it doesn't say anything about the relationships of the people in the household. It doesn't say anything about the number of the people in the household. It doesn't really say, and we're going to talk about income in a minute, anything about the income of the people in the household. So is a household the same? I mean, suppose I have a household, I'm looking at, households in any city. I need to know who's living there, how many people, what are their, is everybody in the household poor? In my country, we have a lot of students living with their parents. The students may be poor, but the parents are not so poor, right? So are we talking about in the household the whole family or just the students, right? So you want to be careful to make sure that what you're defining in the data now, because we can get statistical data on this, is going to be accurately showing you who are the ones at risk. Okay? So it's just a question of making sure that your data on how many households are there, and then we're going to come to poor. How many of them are poor? Okay? But that's the way you start. So you define a household. What's poor? Well, in most countries, we have some sort of threshold for poor. My country, we have one of them is called LICO, low income cutoff. Some of them, which is like you look at the basket of goods and services people consume and what the relative price of those things are, and then you look at, how much money you need to have basic necessities. So you have a definition of poor. But in my country, it's very controversial. I don't know about in Thailand, but there are like 4 different definitions of poor. And people don't agree about what the definition is. But you're going to need a definition of what it is that's poor, because that's going to identify what? Your target audience, right? The population, households, poor. Who are these people? And we should be able to enumerate them. Income. Okay, so poor gives me a threshold, gives me a benchmark. All those people earning less than, X, whose income falls below 200 baht a day. I don't know what your definitions are. Mine, and just think about poor as well. Is poor the same all over the country? No. Poor in Bangkok is different than poor in some small rural village, right? So, again, you want to frame this. Am I talking about all poor people in Thailand? Am I talking about poor people who live in expensive urban cities, who have less access, will come to the access to drinking water? So, again, this is where your identification. Am I talking about rural poor, urban poor? If I'm talking about all the poor, then I'm going to have to take into account the differences between urban and rural poor. Okay? Income. The presumption here is that everybody that lives in the household has some shared income, right? Because the household's consuming the water. My family, we don't say, oh, here's the meter, you get so much water, you pay for that. My son and his family live in my basement, so we're a multi-generational household. We have 3 generations. I have grandchildren too. And we all live in the same house. I don't have a meter that says, you're taking too long a shower. Right? We all consume jointly the water in my house. Now, I make a lot more money than my grandson. We're trying to put him out to work, but he's only 14 months old, so it's going to be a while. So I can't really count him as, he's a consumer. He likes to take long, hot baths, but, he's not contributing to the income flow. So who are the people in the household? So if we're focusing, and you see why I'm saying this, if we're going to focus our policy solutions at the household, we should know who's the household. So, I'm already thinking, okay, maybe I want to give like low-income subsidies to low-income people. Well, how am I going to identify them? My son just finished school. He's not high income. If he gets to apply for the subsidy based on his income, but he lives with me and my husband, we are not low income. He'd get the subsidy, and that'd be really unfair, right? I'm paying the water bills. Right? So you start to think, see where this is going, so the household, but maybe if I have multi-generational families who are different income levels, and I'm going to have a policy that identifies the individual as opposed to the household, I'm going to be spending a lot of money on people that don't need to be subsidized. Right? My son does not need to be subsidized at all because he lives with me. Right? But if they're targeting, the policy targets the individual, he pays his own taxes. We'll mismatch it, right? So that's why you do all this stuff. It's already thinking about the policy stuff. And then we get into pay. Well, how much is too much? Are there benchmarks? How do we pay for water? In my country, it's easy because there's one bill. In parts of the world where you have multiple sources of drinking water, the water vendors, there's the piped water, which you can't drink usually, there's bottled water. You have to talk about where the sources of water are coming from. In mine, you can turn on the tap and you can drink it. In here, you can't drink it out of the tap. So you have to look at how you're paying for it, where you're paying for it, where you're buying it. Are they water vendors? Are you sinking tube wells into the groundwater, etc.? And that's what the last thing says, is every liter of water identical, depending on how you access it. In my country, yeah. Let's turn on the taps. Over here, no. So, you see, looking at your problem, from one sentence, you can already start to learn a lot about what you're talking about. And the word here is, what water use is essential. How many liters a day does every person need to survive versus people that use water beyond what they need to survive? You know, I joke about my bad habit of taking long showers, because it's the way I wake up in the morning. I mean, I could take a much shorter shower. And if you price my water in my country and where I live, not everywhere in my city, I don't even pay per unit water. I pay a flat rate per year. So, you know, then you start thinking, okay. Yeah, I don't like baths. See, she's going to have a new policy prescription to get Nancy out of the shower. I don't like baths. They get too cold. But I take long showers. If they price my water, I take shorter showers, right? Because I'm an economist and I'd be computing my expected utility versus the cost. But, you know, how does water pricing work? You know, is it, do you get a cheaper price if you buy in bulk? You pay more for, you know, buying one of these is way more expensive than buying per unit, than buying a big one, etc. These are all the kind of questions you ask up front. And the more you ask up front, the more you're going to frame your research. So that one is a made-up example. I mean, you could do this study. It's not made up in the sense that nobody would ever think of doing this study. Here's one of the, an example from one of my students' research. I'm going to give you a lot of my students' research and some of my research examples. And apologies to those who are not in the environmental field, because they tend to be, most of them tend to be environmental. But I can give you lots if you want to talk about organ donations or anything. Just ask. If there's something you want, I probably have a policy study that I could give you examples from. So here's a study on how to protect a wetland. And the area in question was an area in not my province, in another part of the country, where development, this is where they're building all the oil sands mines, and they're destroying the wetlands. And so the destruction of the wetlands is causing, that's a picture of the lake. If you can see it up there, see my face is slide with one picture. The yucky stuff, the kind of light-colored stuff, is the eutrophication, the algal blooms that happen because of excessive nutrients going into the lake, because of no longer wetlands. They're paving them over, and so you get these. The lake is lovely in this time of year, March, but by June and July, it's green. It looks like soup. But not very tasty. And so this is a lake that people like to boat on and swim on and fish in. So there are all these community attributes of the lake. And so the green soup that happens in the summer kills the fish, and you don't really want to swim in it. And there's also some health-related effects. So that's the observation. My student went up here to do his field work and do his research, and, you know, trying to come up with a problem statement. So first we look at, this is sort of the background stuff. What are the sources of the problem? Well, one of the problems is a pure externality situation where we've got agricultural uses, which because of, am I doing bad things for you?
Okay.
You didn't want to just sit there and do nothing. You have to move, you know, I got to give you this. You know, I don't want you to be bored. So the phosphates from the fertilizers leach into the groundwater, which gets into the lake. Legal framework, regulations, and property rights. Agriculture is on private property. No laws about fertilizer use. Okay? No way to prevent the flow of the nutrients from the farm into the lake, because there's no property right over the lake. The lake's a public good, is a public community lake. What's the local government's policy tools? Well, in this part of the world, they have what we call zoning, something similar. They decide what land use can go in what region, but they can't control the use of fertilizers because we have no fertilizer policy. This is an interesting one, which is what much of his research was on, is what's a wetland? You know, if you're in the field, we know and love wetlands. What does the public think of a wetland? In my country, wetlands used to be called swamps. Swamp is a word that doesn't sound very appealing, right? It's kind of like, ugh, swamps, bugs, yucky things, leeches, you know, and there was a very, very low understanding of the ecosystem value of a wetland. There are a number of non-governmental organizations that are, you know, almost their whole existence is now on elevating the public's awareness of the values of wetlands in water purification, which is this story here, habitat preservation, ecosystem integrity, etc., wildlife corridors, the whole bit. But people didn't know, I mean, in ignorance at times, they drained wetlands and paved them over. So you've got that barrier as well. But what if I start doing things that affect the farm? What if I start, now I'm thinking policies, what if I start doing things that say, you know, you're not going to be able to use as many fertilizers. Or you can't have your cows right next to the rivers because the cow waste material gets into the rivers, pollutes the rivers, gets in, eutrophies, increases bacterial content in the lake, etc. Well, that's going to affect their income. So these are all the sorts of things you just, and you know, you don't have to sit down and write pages on each of them. You just want to note them at the beginning. You want to make sure you're keeping them in mind. So, here's his, it was a he that did this, here's his problem statement. And this was the beginning of it. There's inadequate protection of vital wasteland resources in the community. Okay? So, define. We don't have to define, there it is, that's good. Of, in, but. Everything else we have to define. I make them do this. They think, you know, they do the same thing you're doing, like, oh boy, this is pretty tedious. But again, it helps you think about it. Inadequate protection. What does that mean? Well, he's got this stuff over here. Lack of regulation. Property rights protect the landowner, not the community. Policy tools of the government. Don't have enough tools yet. I'll keep this story. I've got more examples from this story as I go through the policy process, so you'll see what happens. Inadequate protection, also partly because people don't know what they're valuing. They don't know the contribution that it can make. So we are not stopping the flow of nutrients into the lake is inadequate protection through our laws, our customs, and our awareness. Vital wetland resources, he looks at now specific wetlands in this region. Okay, he's looking at all of he's got a map, here's where your geography comes in, and he's defining the regions where the wetlands are. Why would you do that? Think ahead to policy. So he's talking about the actual land use mapping in the region. Well, yeah.
The first question, the first sentence, can we use it as a problem statement, or you see, it's an outcome statement. This is the outcome of the problem, right? But then you still have to design a problem statement. So what is the sort of,
the operative stuff?
Yeah.
I would say it's the inadequate protection. So he's focusing on the legal
policy
and the policy framework that inhibits the local region from protecting the wetland.
But in the previous one, like the one on drinking water, there isn't any policy thing in the problem statement. No, it's an observation. So he could rewrite this, you know, and this is something this is why it gets complicated. He could rewrite this and say, there's too much eutrophication. So, you know, he would start with that. And this is taking it down a level. So on the drinking water one, I could go and say, yeah, that's my problem up here. But the one I'm going to actually focus on is the lack of access of poor families to multiple sources of drinking water. So, you know, you don't want to, and I'll talk about this in a minute, you don't want to define the solution into your problem. You know, like I could have said, there's no tax on fertilizers. Well, then my policy solution is tax it. But, you know, then I'd have to, but that may be the wrong direction. It might be land use decisions, etc.
You don't want your policy definition to be so narrow that you've only got one policy to look at. So this one is narrowing it from there's eutrophication to I'm going to look at the institutional framework that leads to that problem. So on my drinking water, I could look at the supply side. You know, should we regulate water vendors? Should we reform municipal water supplies? So I could take that poor people pay too much down to, you know, poor people pay too much because, you know, so it's a process of narrowing it down. But the key thing here is not to define it so, you know, if you define it really broadly, you can start broad, but then that's not what you're going to work on, right? So again, you start up here and then you make it down to the one you're going to work on. He's further down that chain, so good question. I forgot what I asked you, but that wasn't it, so we'll move on. Oh, mapping. Why does he map it? He maps it so that when he comes up with his policy options, he's got specific, you know, he knows the size of the area. So suppose we're going to pass another, one of our policy instruments is going to be, I'm going to prohibit the use of agriculture and, you know, in one case they paved over, it's a very interesting story, the mayor paved over a wetland illegally and said the reason it's okay is I've got a recycling station there. So he's got waste bins for bottled water. But, you know, he was saying that's okay. Well, it wasn't okay. It was illegal. He went to jail for paving over the wetland. It's a very good story. Not for long, though, because he was the mayor, ex-mayor by that time. Okay, so he's going to have the region mapped out so that you know how many wetlands there are. How much do we have to protect? You know, and then you can talk about who owns them. Are they privately held? Which in this case they were. They were privately held. So we have an issue of if we change the use of that land from somebody owning it to protecting it for the community, we're going to have to worry about compensation. Right? So he defines it geographically so he knows the scope of the problem. And again, you can see that if you've got a, you know, a national problem, you're not going to be able to do how many wetlands there are really. You're going to just have to talk about it in a much more general context. So your definitions depend on the scope of your problem. And the community is this region, so he can define the community. But Ming-san's question is a good one. How far do you go depends on, down in your specificness of your definition, depends on where you're going to focus your analysis. Here's another one. This is looking at adaptation to climate change in the agricultural sector of the country, the middle of the country. The researcher who did this lived in that part of the country, so he had access to lots of information. And he was worried about climate change affecting agricultural output. So here's his definition. Let's see if it's a good one. The increased climate variability brought by climate change threatens to overwhelm the adaptive capacity of local farmers. Now, I'm not going to tell you how he defined it. You have farmers. You have climate change. How would you define the terms in this statement for Thailand? And I know now that there's some agricultural people in the room. So I know it's not something you have to make up. So, what's the first set of terms you want to define? Not the. Climate variability? Okay. So how do you define that? Any climate scientists in the room? Anybody recall what happened last fall in Bangkok that has to do with climate? Yeah. Okay, so what do you mean by climate variability? Well, there's scientific definitions of that, which would be in terms of there's short-term and long-term. Short-term climate variability are extreme weather events, which we're experiencing now. There's debate about what's causing it. I don't care. I'm not interested in the debate. I have the outcomes. So what do we have that affects agriculture? We have floods. We have droughts. We have things connected to floods and droughts, like insect pests. We're getting all kinds of really exotic insects coming up from other parts of the world. We have a nice little bug called the pine beetle, the mountain pine beetle. There are many types of pine beetles. You have pine beetles. It's a really cool book I'm reading about beetles. Very smart, very clever critters. This pine beetle has destroyed 60% of the forests in British Columbia, of the pine forest. This is not trivial effects of climate change. Why? The pine beetle is a very smart bug. It's amazing. They're just incredible little critters. They're about the size of not even the size of your fingernail. You can see them, but they're just teeny little things. If it's not cold enough, long enough in the winter, their populations explode. Okay? So the climate variability for the pine beetle has been not enough sequential days of cold weather. And by cold, we're talking minus 30 Celsius. You can't even, minus 30 is called, I would be dead if I were a Thai person walking out in that temperature. Even me, I don't go out in minus 30. That's what you need to kill these bugs for 3 weeks. You need that temperature. We used to have it. We used to have 3 weeks in the areas where they are. This is not where I live. This is in the middle of the region. 3 weeks to kill the bugs. If you don't, and you have to have it at a certain time in the winter. If you don't have it, I don't know if they're the larva or the bug stage at this point, develops antifreeze in its body. That's why I say they're so smart. Antifreeze means you can then, you have to get it at the right time, it has to be long enough and cold enough. If you don't, they can withstand, later in the year, cold weather. So their populations just, and they eat everything in their path. They burrow through the wood, through the bark of the tree. Trees are also very smart, my scientists here. Trees have natural defenses. They will increase the sap flow, and they can even produce toxins and stuff. But and the description of these bugs, it's like a horror movie. There'll be millions of them will descend on the tree. And they said you can even hear them burrowing through. It's like a sound. And they overwhelm the tree's defenses. They then, this is why I got to tell the story because it's so funny. After there are a certain number of them in the tree, they release hormones that prevent other bugs from coming in. So they get, me and my family, my close personal 10,000 other pine beetle friends, we get our own tree. So if you're another pine beetle, you have to go to another tree. So it just leapfrogs. And then, once they kill the forest, the trees, they go red and then they go gray and then they're dead. Then when the bugs have killed them all, you'd think, well, they'll die out like any, host and parasite thing. But then they get little gossamer kind of wings, and when they're windstorms, they flow to the next region. Now, climate change has they've always existed, but before climate change increased the winter temperatures. So you look, and this is what's really interesting about climate change. If you look at our average temperature where I live, it hasn't changed. So when you're averaging highs and lows across the season, it's the winter low that's gone up. Boom. We've destroyed 60% of our interior pine forest. So think about the impact. Forestry communities, jobs, it just filters through the whole economy. Now, back to this. So, I could have said forestry, right? Agriculture, floods. Okay? Extreme floods. We plan for the 1 in 100-year flood. What if it comes every 20 years? Or every 10 years? Droughts. We're predicting in this region where this study was done that the droughts, usually they're time limited, 2 years, 3 years. They're now predicting a 5 to 10 year drought. How do you prepare for that? So extreme weather events would be the increased climate variability. Temperature, rainfall, when it happens. And again, this is where it's really important to get data. If you look at average rainfall, in this region in the middle of the country, it hasn't changed that much. It just all comes at once. So what happens when it all comes at once? Erosion, if it comes when you're trying to harvest the crops, really bad, they all rot. So that's, we can define those things. So that, I've just defined the first part of that. Overwhelm. Well, overwhelm means they don't have the resources, the ability to deal with that. What is their adaptive capacity then? So how do farmers react? Farmers have always reacted to climate. The first farmers, 1 million, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, they had climate variability. What are some of the reactions to climate? Changing the type of crop you grow, changing when you plant, if you can. Do you shift when you plant? Do you shift the crop mix? Do you have a different crop mix? Some that are drought tolerant, some that are flood tolerant. Do you work with scientists to get, better rice varieties that will tolerate the flooding at different times? The paper's going to be on salinity. Today, tomorrow, forget when that is. Different rice crops that are more tolerant, or planting other crops that are going to be absorbing the salts. So the question is, we've always had adaptation. Why can't we adjust to it? Because it's too much, too fast. A lot of climate things are not overnight. Gradual warming, gradual cooling, those sorts of things. But we're getting these extremes that threaten, that there's very little that you can do. And local farmers, again, I'm just getting this was in the province of Saskatchewan, it was the whole province. But he then went on to focus on, in terms of farmers, he went on to focus on small-scale farmers, family farms, because the big industrial farms have a lot more, they have more capital, they have more adaptive capacity. So, we've got some sample problem statements. You want to define some terms. You now want to think about, have I done this in a way that's going to help me? Have I defined the problem or stated the problem in a way that allows for action? Okay, so let's think back to the three I've given you. Okay. Drinking water. Can you see some actions? Thinking ahead? Sure. Looking at that statement, I can work on poor. I can try to elevate people's income. I can look at the access part of it. I can look at the supply side, who's delivering the water. So, there are all kinds. I have too many. In this statement, I would say, I have too many things I can work on. If I'm just one researcher, if I'm part of a huge big national study, no, I can have all kinds of people, but I'm going to have to narrow this one down a bit. Inadequate protection, yeah, we talked about the things. I'm going to look at zoning, I'm going to look at buying the land, I'm going to look at buying land, protected areas. I'm going to look at regulations that affect the amount of pesticide use, etc. So I've got a whole pile of things I can look at that are particular to this region, which is what keeps it manageable. I can't deal with the climate change. I can't deal with climate change. I can't control that. What I can look at is how do I make farmers more resilient? How do I increase their ability to cope? Might be that I say, like the forestry industry with my pine beetle, get a job in Vancouver. Because you're not giving, it's going to be the trees the beetles ate. Takes 60 to 80 years to get harvestable timber again. They're gone. They're gone. They're totally gone. We've been harvesting the wood and making bowls out of it because it also creates a little stain. These bugs, you got to read this book. These bugs are wonderful. They contain fungus on them. They carry little funguses on them, and the fungus is what creates this blue stain in the wood, which then gets the tree to let out its pheromones or whatever the trees produce, and then, it's this big complicated thing. We're harvesting the wood as fast as we can, but when it's gone, it's gone. So there's no adaptation there, other than get out of the industry. Right? The farmers, we have more stuff.
Just curiosity, how do you deal with the bugs?
The bugs?
Yeah.
You can't. You can't. They tried everything. They poisoned the bugs, right? I mean, we're talking about more bugs than, gazillions. They're just, I do not want to see this because, it's horrifying. This one, the guy writing the book I'm reading about it, said they once all covered him. And it's like, oh, not a tree. But it's scary. So they tried poisoning them. What happens when you poison one species, scientists? Yes, you start killing the ones that, are part of the natural ecosystem. So you can't poison them. They tried cutting down the forest ahead of it. Like when there are forest fires, you often cut a buffer. They tried cutting that. Bugs fly over. There's nothing they can do.
To sterilize them.
They're trying that. But, and they also tried, as I said, the bug puts out this hormone that keeps other bugs from, my tree. They tried putting those on trees, to pretend that the bugs had already, my family's in, you can't come. They couldn't get enough of it to do it. You were talking about protecting things that are, hundreds of thousands of hectares. They also tried, let's see, what was the other thing they tried? One of the only approaches, and this is what the book that I'm reading is saying, that might work, one of the reasons the devastation is so bad is managed forests. They're not a mixed forest. These are all pines. So if you have pines and hardwoods and, the bugs, they're very selective. They only eat pines. They don't eat spruce, although there's some risk that once they wipe out all the pines, they'll switch their favorite food. But at the moment, that's the only thing. So we made the problem worse by having monoculture. That's the only solution that seems to be when the forests are rejuvenated, don't plant all pines. Well, now you think about what's the impact on the forest industry. They like monoculture, right? Lowers the cost of harvesting, da-da-da-da-da. So, yep. So you start thinking, have I got enough action? Have you got insights in terms of clues about options? Well, yeah, again, all of those things sort of create in your mind. Oh yeah, I can think about this. So Ming-san's just asked about my bugs. Yeah, what can I do about the bugs? Well, that's what you start thinking about. So that's where your research gets away. Have I challenged my assumptions? So you want to think things like, have I defined solutions into the problems? Do I have the right target audience? Do I have the right geographical region? Do I have the right focus? All of these things are things that you want to ask yourself. So here's defining the solution into the problem, and I already gave you an example before. But there are too few pollution taxes to deal with air pollution. Well, I've already defined my solution then is more taxes, as opposed to maybe taxes aren't the right solution. Maybe I want to change the location of the polluters, maybe I want regulations, etc. So you think, that's not the problem. I'm limiting my analysis to one policy. So you can restate, I just picked a city, there's too much air pollution in Dhaka. There's too much air pollution in Bangkok. It's better than it was. But, that's not creating a solution. And again, when you would define all those points. So this is often an issue of the scales, and this is where Ming-san's question a little while ago. I got to define it so that I know the amount of, my scope for my research, but not get it so narrow that I don't have a full set of options. Okay, so this is where I said, none of this stuff is hard. It seems really simple to state it. What's hard is applying it. So you got to, I can't emphasize enough, you do got to practice. You do have to practice with this. Okay. You're framing a story. I'm setting up a situation that we can all understand. I'm telling you a story. I'm telling you how things are going to emerge. I don't want to limit it too much either. I want to make sure that I've got other views that can happen in here. But I'm going to frame this all so I know what I'm talking about. Okay, stakeholders. So what I've given you examples so far are coming from policy analysts, not from other stakeholders. So we want to include all of these other people at this stage so that we are sure we've got the problem defined in a way that enables us to design solutions that might be accepted. And when I'm teaching policy students, they often say, well, if we're doing that, doesn't politics determine everything? Why am I even looking at things that aren't relevant for the politicians? And my answer is twofold. One, politicians change, governments change, and two, you can sometimes convince even a politician that isn't in favor initially of a better way to do things. So you want to avoid thinking that, well, it's all politics, I can't really say anything. There are chances to change things. So here's a way to think about stakeholders. Again, I like little checklists. I like ways to do this simply. So I'm going to give you some things to look at in terms of identifying and thinking about the various stakeholders. Who are they? By that I mean the actors. Just list them. Who are the possible people that are interested or relevant or would be affected by this policy area? Motivation. What do they want? What does the industry want? What does the community want? What do the farmers want? What are their motivations? What will it take to make them happy? Because we're looking for common ground here. We're looking for ways that we can do our policy analysis so that we're not sitting there, waving our hands about something that will never happen. Could we have done that corn ethanol differently? Could I have, it was an hour with the ministers, so we didn't have any planning. But had we had planning, could we have done it differently, knowing the farm lobby was going to say, subsidize me, please? Could we have thought about that more and had an answer for that motivation? What do they believe? I mean, it's amazing that you can often change the belief of an organization. I was involved in a PhD dissertation. I was just on the committee of a political scientist who looked at why various industries supported or didn't support carbon taxes. And some of the ones that supported them are the ones that you would think would be the least likely to support them. Part of the oil industry. Why? They changed their belief. Why? They decided that they would be less harmed by a tax than extensive regulation. They would have more freedom and flexibility to do the cost-minimizing solution for them under a tax. So their initial belief was, let's fight climate policy. Let's be opposed to it. Let's stand up there and say, climate change isn't happening. But once the tipping point happened where they went, look, there's enough evidence, we're going to be losing, we're going to change our belief. And we're going to now support a policy that you would have thought we wouldn't support. Why? It's in my interest to do so, because I'll have more freedom and flexibility. So beliefs can change. Key resources is a really important thing. How much money do these people have? How much power do they have? What are the organizations? You need to know that. And the sites are who's relevant, who's going to be making decisions when and by whom. So we then want to think about, so we've got this stakeholder thing, and I've got a little chart for you on the next slide. But we also want to think about the level of complexity. So, sorry, the policy one's a little bit later. So we've got our policy problem. We're thinking a bit about stakeholders. Now we want to think about what's the level of this policy problem. How ugly is it? And by ugly, I mean complicated. If we can have a hierarchy, and this sort of tells you, again, your problem statement will be relevant to which level of this that you're going to deal with. The highest level is, we're talking about national governments or even international governments. This is a major policy initiative, a huge policy agenda, which you may have your task forces and your big commissions on. The second level is at the level of an agency program. Okay, so this would be across government, perhaps more than one ministry, more than one division in the government, but it's like looking at climate change. You need the Ministry of Environment, you need the Ministry of Agriculture, etc. Functional is looking at a particular project. So this is still a policy problem at a bigger level, perhaps across ministries. This we're now getting down into a particular, I have the authority to deal with, access to drinking water. It's one ministry, or even at the municipal level. And then when you get to the minor level, you get down to, this is a project level problem. This is once I've got the project, how do I implement it? Which may be another policy problem. So you just want to think, depending on where you are, what the policy level is. So here's the first of one of my many charts. You can sort of think about this in terms of your framing. How can I frame my policy problems? The thing I'm going to look at over here are the variables that are going to determine how complex my problem is. How many decision makers? Is this a problem that has 50 different solutions or 2? Do I have stakeholders that are kind of all aligned? Do they agree with each other or not? And how much do I know about this problem? So the certainty about outcomes is more on, is it a problem where I think I'm going to have really good evidence? Back to my pine beetles. When we went into trying to deal with the problem that started about now close to 10 years ago, we didn't know enough about what to do. So we went down all these crazy policy paths. Is that different than dealing with how to get drinking water to people where we know who the players are, etc.? So problems that are well structured have these characteristics. Not a whole lot of decision makers. I'm not dealing with 25 policy options. I may be dealing with 3 or 4. Everybody kind of agrees on what the issues are. We may not agree on the solutions, but we agree on the issues. And I have a pretty good idea of what my analysis is going to lead. We get over here into moderately structured, which says it's getting a little worse. And then we get to poorly structured, where you have a lot of decision makers, huge numbers of policy, lots of conflict, and we have no idea what's going on. My recommendation to people in terms of tackling policy problems is don't spend a lot of time here, because it's going to take you a lot of time. Sometimes you have to, the really ugly, thorny problems. But the more you can focus on parts of the problem that get more structured, you can sometimes start here on a problem to build up to the big stuff. You start with the big stuff, climate change. That's why it's such an awful problem, because climate change is over there. Poverty's in the middle. And dealing with wetlands in a region is the well-structured one. Now, to get to the climate change, you might start with things like looking at wetlands and build up your policy expertise.